foundation, if you can believe it, from a love of politics. Of course, my parents were my very first foundation from a love of politics. We used to sing Bogan jingles, if anybody remembers Bogan. I mean, like, we were like early political hacks from the womb. And my parents always taught us that politics matters. And when I came here to Westminster, David Drake told me that politics matters. And Frank Finsley told me that politics matters. And just the way people conducted themselves at this school told me that the way we conduct ourselves publicly is important. And not just that also, but from Dave Drake, politics matters, elections are important, the outcome determines history. And that to me, to know from the time I was in high school to now what I wanted to be a part of was a great gift. And it was absolutely wonderful. And I'll never forget Westminster for putting that in me through the teachers that y'all have here today. I also learned some things at Westminster that I had to unlearn in my job as a political reporter. Some lessons that all of the young ladies here I'm sure are learning today. Be polite. Don't talk to strange men. Don't interrupt people. Don't gossip. I'm a political reporter. My job is to approach politicians who are mostly strange men and interrupt them whatever they're doing and ask them, I'm like, what's the most uncomfortable question I can ask him right now? And then I tweet about it. I tell everybody what that senator just said in the corner, and now everybody knows. So that's kind of the more fun part of my job. But I really take it seriously. I take it seriously again because I really think that politics matters. And what I have found in covering politics, a lesson that I think I learned as a reporter, and even less so when I was a staff member on the Hill, which was wonderful, but as a reporter you get some distance, and that's why I left politics, is I wanted distance from it. It had gotten too personal, too political, too partisan, if you couldn't believe it. It was even a long time ago, but I saw things changing, and I really didn't want to be a part of politics anymore, but I still loved it and knew it was important. And so I chose to go into reporting to sort of take a little arm's length distance and then see what I could apply through journalism. In doing that, what I've seen and what I see every election cycle is that politics is also an almost perfect barometer for our country. And when we see what happens in elections as they're happening, it tells us what our fellow Americans are going through. You know, are we content? Is this kind of a ho-hum election? Are we worried? Are we anxious? Are we frustrated? The people we're picking answers those, and the people who are chosen from the party that's not your own also lets you know a lot about people who live different lives from you. And this is their way to change their future. And to me, the fact that we have that in America, we have the belief that we can change our future by picking somebody to be our voice for us, is incredible to me. And to me, it's like a little bit overwhelming. I think it's absolutely wonderful. But beginning in 2006 was actually when I became a reporter. It's also when I started to see elections start to go a little bit downhill. And I say that because Americans continue to vote for change. 2006, there was a big wave election. The Democrats took over the House and Senate. 2008, another big change election. President Obama won the White House. 2010, a huge change election, the rise of the Tea Party. I covered some of those healthcare reform forums that were supposed to be town hall meetings, and one girl literally left there. She's like, I mean, that was better than an episode of. She didn't say what did she say? She didn't say it was better than. She didn't say it was better than an episode of Oprah. Something to the effect of that was better than Jerry Springer. It was, wasn't it? I was waiting for the chairs to start being thrown. But the more people started voting for change, the more extreme I think the results became. So people wanted something different. They didn't even almost care what it was. They just wanted something different. And unfortunately, the government that we've gotten as a result of those elections, I think, has become less and less functional. So people wanted change, and I think they are continuing to want more change because the results that they've gotten have not been what they were looking for. We have had since the 2006 elections, which my view of it was a lot of that was driven by the Iraq War. Since we had the Iraq War, I think a lot of people lost trust in their government at that point. Democrats did. Then I think we can fast forward a little bit to the financial crisis would make almost no matter who was there, because the results are so foreign to our concept of common sense. After the financial crisis, I saw a lot of churn during elections over the passage of the Health Care Act. A lot of people wanted a better healthcare system. Some people wanted universal health care. I think what they got felt like it was out of their control. People's lives were changing, and maybe they wanted change, but maybe that wasn't the change that they wanted. Or even the health care bill that they got hasn't solved the problems that they saw in front of them. And then since the passage of the Health Care Act, we've had multiple government shutdowns, or people just on the precipice of shutting down the government, and the rest of us are just kind of left to wonder, like, what in the world is going on? And my third grader could do a better job at getting a result than the guys up there in Washington, and girls in Washington. I don't want to just blame the guys. So that, to me, that is the framework for this election cycle. That is what has laid the groundwork for what we're all watching. We talk about it's a kind of a combination between theater. It's also kind of a combination of theater, football, blood sport, knife fight, and really it's just totally bewildering to watch. And I think what we've seen so far has given rise to the candidate who I'm watching the closest there. Obviously, there were 17 Republican candidates and 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 Democrats. We never knew who was really running in the first place. But the candidate who I watch is somebody I call Dirty Tranders. There it is! Dirty Tranders! This is Donald Trump, who had a baby with Bernie Sanders. And that's what we're choosing between these days. So, obviously, these may not be the people who are winning the nominations, and Dirty Tranders may not be the president. But Dirty Tranders, to me, is what politics has become. And if you overlay Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, will you click it for me? So Bernie Sanders, this is what they really look like. They kind of look alike, actually. They've got a lot in common. They're both from the outer boroughs of New York. They both, if you listen carefully, they both say huge. They don't. Everything is huge. Everything is huge. They both have a lot of the same policy positions. This probably comes from the fact that they are both running for nominations of the party that they don't really belong to. I mean, Bernie Sanders is literally not a Democrat, and he never has been. And Donald Trump is kind of a recent aficionado of the Republican brand, I would say. But he's certainly more conservative than liberal, I think. I mean, I think that's what we can all guess. But they're both populist, and I've been to a number of rallies for both of them. And when I say that they're populist, they put themselves in the seats that they are talking to. And they talk about, from Hillary Clinton, we hear a lot of I will do this, I have done that. From a number of the candidates, a lot of first person talk. These guys talk about we. They are putting themselves in the crowd of all of us who are bewildered at what is going on in Washington. And they are both saying, I'm going to change it, and I'm going to tell you how I'm going to change it. We can also, if you'll click for me, they have a similar message, and it's very interesting to see the overlay of it. They both say that there is too much money in politics. They both say that special interests have co-opted the government, and that the government is basically working at the behest of lobbyists. And as somebody who used to work in government, that's kind of true. I mean, a constituent will always be more important than a lobbyist to a certain extent, and then it's actually become a relatively sad state of affairs. Nobody likes to raise money, everybody has to. Nobody can get reelected without millions of dollars in the bank. When a senator goes in for his first day, his or her first day of orientation, they're told, well, you gotta raise $50,000 today, have you done it? Every day they wake up and need to be raising $50,000. There's just an enormous burden. And that process is through their mind every time they're talking to somebody who's not a lobbyist and who's not giving them money. So Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump both say that there's too much money in politics. And if you'll click for me, they say Washington's broken. And if you'll click for me, if you can believe it, they're both against NAFTA. But for similar reasons. They both said that the deals that were negotiated in the 1990s, the trade deals, when the politicians were negotiating those deals, they weren't thinking about American workers. They were thinking about American businesses who said to them, this is what I need. That whether it was intended or not, it has led to a number of job losses in some sectors. It's led to job gains in other sectors. But when Donald Trump goes to Pendleton, South Carolina and says, I am not going to negotiate a dumb trade deal like NAFTA, he's talking to a room full of people who have lost their jobs in cotton mills and textile mills. These people are still suffering because of policies that were passed 20 years ago. Bernie Sanders has a very similar message about NAFTA and about a lot of things that the government is doing, that he says these are deals being made not for your interest, not for you as a voter, but for the big banks, for people on Wall Street, that the politicians in Washington don't care about you, they care about these guys giving them money. So they have a very similar, almost identical set of policy positions. Another one, if you could click for me, which we just found out about, Donald Trump is against the Iraq War in a big way. Bernie Sanders was also against the Iraq War. He voted against it. But these are two men who are potentially leading for the nomination in both of their parties, and they have almost the same policy positions in a lot of ways. But the biggest difference, or not, actually I'm not going to go there quite yet. If we could if you could click it one more time, if you wouldn't mind. The other similarities in addition to policy positions are the structures of their campaigns. Bernie Sanders has his own source of money. He is able to literally flip a switch, send an email, tell the 3.6 million people who have already given him a donation, which is averages $27. If you ever go to Bernie Sanders rally, he'll tell you that. 3.6 million people, not voters, these are people who have given him money. So he can go back to those people again and again and again, small dollar donations, and say, I need your help. I have to run a campaign. I have to pay staffers. You can do it for me. That's how he has gotten around the money trap. Donald Trump has $9 billion. You should probably spend a little more of it on an old-fashioned campaign structure. But he also doesn't have, he's not working with lobbyists. He is not working within the traditional political confines. And when I go to these gentlemen's events, that's what people love about them, and that's why they trust them. Whether they should trust them or not, I mean, I guess we'll all find out throughout the course of the campaign, and that's why these campaigns are so helpful. But they trust them because they don't think that they have this outside need of money. They don't have one ear listening to voters and the other ear listening to people give them donations. And if we can flip it one more time, this is, I think, the most important piece of Donald Trump and of Bernie Sanders. And whether they win the nominations or not, the people who win the nominations will learn this lesson, that politicians like Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump have got to be more authentic. And that is another thing that people love about them. Donald Trump talks directly to his voters. He has 6.5 million followers on Twitter, which is greater than the circulation of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and USA Today combined. And sometimes he says, you know, I really like Twitter because it's like having a newspaper but without the overhead. And it's true. And people can just tap straight into Donald Trump and hear what he thinks about poor Jeb Bush that day. It's so awful, but so entrancing. And when people go to his rallies, they think that he's telling the truth, and some of it is so offensive it must be true, you know. And he'll just read, he'll be like, hey, you know, I read this newspaper article, right? Well, this is a lie right here. This is a lie. This is a classic, you know. But they feel like they're having breakfast with Donald Trump, and he's bringing them into his world, and he is telling them that he cares about their world. And Bernie Sanders does much the same thing. And I'll just tell two quick stories about how I knew both of these guys are playing a whole different game than anybody we've really seen before. Donald Trump, I mentioned seeing him in Pendleton, South Carolina. I had seen Marco Rubio up the street, like 50 miles up the street in South Carolina. It all blurs together. This was last week. Marco Rubio had a very respectable group of 300 people in a Marriott hotel ballroom. And it was, you know, in the round, and it looked really good, and I'm sure it played very well on TV, and they had sent an email out to their donors and some of their supporters, and so he had a very pro-Rubio crowd, and he just had his catastrophe on the debate stage. And so they had this friendly crowd. He did a really good job. I'm like, well, terrific public speaker. But I was watching I watched him for a while, and then I was watching the people next to me, and they were all mouthing the words. They knew what he was saying. They knew what he was gonna say. He's like, my average donation is. They're like, 20. You know, it's we gotta get rid of the big banks. We gotta get rid of the billionaires, and they're like. They have bought into his philosophy, and again, it's because he has told them that he cares about them, and he means it. And Donald Trump, I actually think means it. And that is why it's resonating with people. They see them, they believe them. They may not be actually the people who win, but to me that will hopefully change the way politics is conducted, really for the rest of, hopefully the rest of our life. I hope that it set us on a new course. Very quickly, I'll tell you the big differences between Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. They're obviously not the same person. They have many of the same complaints about the system, but they do not share the blame. If you could click for me, Donald Trump blames the political class and people who've been in Congress and mayor's offices and the House and Senate for 40 years, and that is Bernie Sanders. And Bernie Sanders blames, if you could click for me, billionaires like Donald Trump. They actually blame each other for everything that's wrong. And the great irony, we may find out later on this year, is that if we get Bernie Sanders as a nominee and we get Donald Trump as a nominee, the man who comes through may be both a politician and a billionaire. So if you could click for me, we might have Michael Bloomberg and then it'll get really interesting. My favorite part about this election year is that it is so unpredictable. We have no idea what's going to happen. Hillary Clinton could have kind of a moment of clarity and then just sort of come out of her shell, and then people connect to her and, oh, why do we think Bernie Sanders is going to do so well? Donald Trump could implode. I mean, we all know it. It could happen any minute now. But it hasn't happened yet, so we don't know what's going to happen. But if you could click for me, well, I'll find out soon. This is where he or she is going to live for the first time, or for 8 more years. Coming up, we have the South Carolina this Saturday is the South Carolina Republican primary. We'll find out Donald Trump's what happens for him. If he wins South Carolina, he really will be very hard to stop. I don't know who stops him except for him. The Democratic primary is a week later in South Carolina. Then the circus comes to Georgia, March 1st. And I have a favor to ask everybody in this room. I want everybody to vote. And I would really love for everyone to find a